I have heard so many times, I don't have to worry about privacy because I have nothing to hide. But privacy is so much more than that. Protecting your privacy keeps you safe and those who know you safe as well. Today, we're talking to someone who is building the tools to help you choose privacy. So stay tuned. Hey everybody, this is Chris Brandt here with Sandesh Patel. Welcome to another Future Video podcast. Before we get going, I just want to take a second and ask you to hit that subscribe button. The majority of people who watch this channel are not subscribed, and that subscription helps the channel a ton. So please click on that subscribe button if you can. Ghostery was created in 2008 as a weekend project of David Cancel to get a peek behind what was happening with the web pages he was visiting. Fast forward to 2017 when Ghostery was acquired by Cliqz, a company out of Munich, Germany. Now Ghostery has a whole suite of privacy and security products, including the Dawn web browser, the Glow search engine, and Insights, which provides real-time analytics. And today we are talking with Cliqz founder and Ghostery's CEO, Jean-Paul Schmetz, about the increasing importance of online privacy and what it means for you. Jean-Paul, or JP as he goes by, will fill us in on how Ghostery's suite of security and privacy tools help to keep you safe and generally make things work better. Welcome, JP.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, thanks for coming on. I'm excited to talk to you about Ghostery because through all this, I've become a Ghostery user, and I got to say, I am greatly enjoying this. I was talking, before we started rolling here about how one of my old favorite sites is Boing Boing, and they just eventually became so overloaded with ads and things like that were just kind of constantly popping up. And with all my Chrome tabs, it just was grinding everything to a halt. And with Ghostery, it just flies. It just pops right up and goes. And I'll forever be appreciative of that aspect of it. But
that's what we do.
But there's the endorsement up front. Before we get into that, tell me a little bit about the sometimes confusing history of Ghostery and Cliqz and how it all came about.
So Cliqz and Ghostery were both founded in 2008. So they lived parallel life on each side of the Atlantic, I guess. But founded essentially for the same, one of the same reason. Cliqz was more geared towards search engines, and Ghostery more towards anti-tracking, etc. But the core idea was to make visible what we knew was going on beneath the web pages that everyone was looking at. So, as an engineer, and David Cancel was also an engineer, just looking at these requests that were somehow emanating from the browser while you were loading a page was just fascinating. And we suspected that this could be abused. Little did we know that it was done at such a scale.
Yeah, that was an understatement for sure.
That was an understatement, but at the beginning it was just a few, maybe 5 or 6 requests, and now you routinely encounter websites which have 3 layers of trackers, and basically 50, 60 companies looking at you over the shoulder. And we wanted to make that not only visible, but also offer tools for the users to stop it. And that is just, it remains a huge problem. In fact, it's become bigger and bigger and bigger.
Let's touch on that. Like I said, I hear so many people tell me, it's like, why do I need to worry about, privacy? It's like, I have nothing to hide. I'm like, I keep explaining, I don't think you understand how much you have to hide, actually, to start with. But, tell me why privacy is so important.
I think this question is very hard to answer in sort of philosophical term or what people expect to answer. But there's one thing that we found is really everyone agrees on. Like I've never heard someone, not agreeing with that except to just provoke me, is that if you would translate what is going on into the real world, so let's just do that, right? Like you decide to go to a shop, and let's start with easy stuff, right? The cashier is asking you for your zip code, and you don't have the option to say no, right?
Right.
Or you have to show your ID before you can buy anything, or you cannot pay cash. It has to be with credit card so they can track you around all the stores. we wouldn't like that shop very, very much, right? A shop where you have to identify yourself before you enter and pay only digitally, etc. But it gets a lot worse. Imagine that while you're in the store, there's like 50 guys in black suits and microphones, talking to each other about what you are looking at, what you are buying, what you are doing, etc. You can see this from the privacy perspective, say, well, I have a right to privacy and this is not right. Or you can just say, like, wait a minute, what are you guys doing? Right? Like this is not even my privacy. This is not like, I didn't sign up for this at all. And there's really no good reason to do that. And then you go to the next shop and you find out that these guys are following you and these are the same guys, right? But this is what's going on online, right? And then these guys we talked about the segment that John Oliver did, basically are selling the data to data brokers, who then essentially exchange all of this data and make you fully transparent. So is it the problem that you become fully transparent to these companies? I think yes. If you say, well, I don't have anything to hide, then it's okay, that's fine. You're not going to get super hurt by this, maybe, if you're lucky. But it's still creepy as hell. And why would you accept it, right? Like, why? If it was in the real world, there would be laws against this. And in fact, I'm pretty sure there is a law having a bunch of guys dressed in black talking about you in stores, right? Like someone would do something.
Yeah.
And yet online, because it's not visible, because it requires a combination of technological knowledge and imagination to know what's going on, this has become acceptable or accepted. I'm not sure, right? It's done.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, it is hurting the user who, with a little luck, has the possibility and the knowledge to install things like Ghostery, but it's also hurting the site themselves, because if you allow these trackers on your site, they are basically tracking your customers. And if you don't really know what they're doing with that data, then it's, again, I mean, I don't know if you've tried that. I actually tried that for another startup I was working on, to go in a supermarket and write down all the prices and take pictures of the shelves. You will get kicked out quickly, right? And for some reason, on the website of that same supermarket, there are 50 trackers that are doing exactly that. So I think we live in a world where technology has gone a bit too fast for human intuitions to adapt.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And if we do this translation, if we make it visible, if we show how it is, people really universally say, yeah, I don't like that. Like, why should I take that, right? Why is it done this way? Because they expect that the digital world works like the physical world. And that's just not the case.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the John Oliver piece, because I thought that was really fascinating, because one of the things that he was talking about was he was buying data from data brokers, and I'll try to play a clip here.
And if you happen to be a legislator who is feeling a little nervous right now about whether your information is in this envelope and you are terrified about what I might do with it, you might want to channel that worry into making sure that I can't do anything.
He tracked some members of Congress to Capitol Hill, and because of, even though the data is anonymous, he was able to de-anonymize the data really easily by combining different, parameters. And he sort of held a manila envelope up there and said, you fix this or I'll show you what I found.
So we've done the same in Germany, believe it or not, 5 years ago, with also a member of Congress in the German Congress, and found data and confronted them with the data, including their tax returns and stuff like that. They all supported, obviously, legislation to stop that, but it was very difficult for them to even draft such a thing. I think GDPR is the closest thing that comes to what they came up with.
Yeah.
But it is, in the world of technology, it is very difficult to regulate something that is moving so fast, which is not defined. If you don't have a 10-year history of abuse, it's very difficult for them to do it. So I think that unless you are taking matters in your own hands, it's very unlikely that you can count on the government to really help you. I mean, data brokers, by the way, are different problems because they could be regulated, right? These are really organizations that they should be and can be regulated. But the actual collecting of data, I think that's where it's going to be a bit more difficult to regulate. And therefore, it is important that Well, it is important that people see their browser or use a browser, that is really truly a user agent. Like there's a technical term for the browser, which is user agent. So the browser has to work for you. And there's only a few browsers, and John Oliver luckily named two that I'm involved with, that really see themselves as user agents. And Chrome is not on that list because at the end of the day, Chrome is working for Google, and Google is the biggest tracker, and you cannot expect Chrome, to be an agent of change there in the tracking business. That's just not reasonable.
Yeah, and unfortunately, folks who are in the YouTube game, I think, find out pretty quickly that there's a lot of stuff that just only works with Chrome, and so you get kind of stuck in that world. But I agree with you; it's like it's not the ideal platform because it's got conflicting interests.
So as long, this is getting a little technical, but as long as you can still install extensions to the Chrome browser that do the work like Ghostery does on the Chrome browser, then you install an extension. Google is working towards a change in the APIs that govern how extension deal with the browser called Manifest v3. We believe we can still offer the same service, but there will be some limitation to what we do, especially connected to this artificial intelligence anti-tracking that we do. But so you can see stuff sneaking in Chrome, trying to make it difficult to do what we do.
There's all this talk about elimination of cookies and things like that, but I think when you look at the Google Chrome experience, I think that's just for them a way to establish a competitive advantage against people who are using cookies, and they'll have their own mechanisms to track people, right?
Yeah, so 2 points regarding that. One is cookies have been dying since they were invented. So I think the tracking industry has adapted to that fear, the fear they have since many, many years. The problem is, the cookie is definitely a problem because it saves a bit of information and brings it to the third party in another site. But the core problem is the fact that a website can and must do third-party requests. So if you're going to BongBong, the example that you just mentioned, there will be innumerable other requests going to other sites while you are going to BongBong. And if they carry cookies, it's bad because that means that they can keep information about you between different visits and different sites. But just the fact that they can connect will at least carry some signature, if only your IP, that allows people to actually continue to track you. So we're not going to solve the problem completely by just eliminating cookies. And the second point is that privacy and antitrust issues are incredibly connected. So the reason why these platforms like Google and Facebook are so big is because they have been aggressively collecting data for the last 20 years, and they just simply know more.
Yeah.
If you know more, then you can you can see it positively. You can do a better service, or you can see it negatively. You can have ads that make more money, and therefore you can just destroy your competitors, etc. And they have reached a point with Chrome, for example, for Google, where they control both the platform, the tool that people use to go on the internet, and the tracking and the advertising and everything. So they have zero incentives to letting go of that power and it's self-reinforcing. So that's a big problem. And both Google and Meta, I guess Facebook, the big platforms, are data collecting machines. That's what they do. They don't even hide it, right? It's not
right. Yeah, that's the business they're in. That's the business they're in. I think, there's another aspect of this too. I mean, you talk about sort of how it can lead to, very anti-competitive behaviors and things like that. But I think it also puts the end user into, their own little echo chamber sometimes too, right? I mean, they keep getting fed the same thing and sort of amplifying that message.
So, as you said, it comes from the same origin, right? So it's probably more a Facebook problem than a Google problem in this particular case. But if you basically measure everything through engagement, which is basically clicks and time spent, and you combine that with a lot of data and human nature, which is not perfect, you get what you get, right? People do not like to be confronted with other points of view. They will tend to engage with content that reinforces their belief.
Yeah.
And if you know what people's beliefs are, then you can just provide more of it. And when you provide more of it, in order to be interesting, it has to be more and more extreme, right? So you basically have a machine that can only go that way. Less data being given would also allow these things to not go that way, right? It doesn't have to go more and more extreme if you don't keep reinforcing the thing. And would provide a little bit at least of reasonable balancing, because I don't know, imagine in the old world, like really making analogies to the analog world, because it helps you understand. Like if you live in a village of, I don't know, like 1,000 people, 100 people, whatever, and you're the only one who has crazy ideas, you will know that. People will make you know that, right?
Yeah.
If you go then online in these echo chambers and you have the feeling that there is 100,000 of these little cities with each one weirdo that has weird ideas, you're going to get into a serious community of serious weirdness.
Yeah.
And you're going to self-reinforce, right? You will never get the feedback that you're just crazy. And that's a little bit what's going on, because, I mean, it's good that we've connected people, because the weird ideas can be like me, like building modems in the 80s, right? So that's great. You can connect to other people doing that. But that was in the tech industry, that was very much the example we used many years ago, saying this is great, right? Connecting people is great, because you can be the nerdy kid with the very peculiar hobby, and you get connected to others and everything is getting better. But that's also true of people who have just crazy ideas.
Yeah.
And they get connected too, right? And they do their things.
Yeah, and eventually those ideas get so loud they drown everything else out. I mean, I'm completely with you. I remember the promise of the internet. We're going to connect everybody, and it's going to lead to a whole new era of civilization, because we're all going to have this common understanding, and that didn't work out.
It's true if you're optimist and you are connecting really good people, right? It becomes a problem if you're connecting terrorists or if you're connecting people that are really bad people.
Yeah.
And so human nature plus a very a big focus on a specific type of data is a problem. And using an extension like Ghostery basically prevents the data from getting totally out of control, in the sense that it's difficult for Google, Facebook, and others to define this echo chamber way too narrowly for your own good, right?
We've certainly seen the implications of that. I mean, we've all been subject to nation state actors, targeting disinformation at us, and the ability to track how, people think, is a big part of that.
I think John Oliver put it's a very interesting point, is that politicians depend, in the US at least, because Europe has some strict laws against this, but US politicians depend on this ability to track at the atomic level almost, right? And state actors, other countries basically do that as well. I remember when we did the thing in Germany with the politicians, that the journalist was acquiring the data, so she did the whole chain. She in fact ended up pretending that she was a Secret Service agent, because that's the best way to stop the questions, because they say, we can sell you the data, it's fine, because no one will ever find out because you're Secret Service. They were more worried about selling the data to a marketing agency or someone who would talk about it, or someone who would be a competitor to them. And that's bad, because that means that Secret Services have bought data of people, and that can be used to all kinds of problematic things. The only thing, by the way, that you can do at this point is install something like us on your browser, or use another browser.
I haven't downloaded it yet. So it's just a browser. I download it and onto my Mac, and I'm ready to go.
Depending on the platform that where you want to put it on, and we are on all platforms, it changes a little bit. So the best way to do it, obviously, you download a browser on one of the platforms. So you go to the App Store or the extension store, and you download you go to the app stores on mobile, and you go to our website on desktop. You download the browser, you're fully secured, and that's probably the most secure way of doing it. If you want to continue, or you must continue to use Chrome or Safari, for example, on iOS, then you have to go to their extension store and download the Ghostery extension on top of your existing browser, which allows you, it's a very easy step, let's say, because you don't change anything, right? You don't change your habits, and it protects you. I would say 90% of what the browser would actually do.
Yeah.
And we are just launched on Safari, which means that for the first time you are able to protect yourself on the iOS platform, which is already a bit more secure, but it's not perfect, right? So you do need an additional step.
Yeah, and with some of the anonymization features that Apple's introduced too, I got to imagine that's a really awesome complement to that.
Yeah, I mean, and on mobile, you have one additional component is that if you imagine a website loading as really the collection of, let's say, hundreds of requests, and each request is a fairly expensive operation in terms of battery and time. We reduce that dramatically because we block all of these data requests going out. So most likely your battery will be positively affected. The speed is definitely affected. So you only have positive things because simply the browser will do less things and focus on only the things that you see and cut out all of the things that you don't see and don't benefit from. So that has only positive effect. And that's something that iOS did not really remove by default, right? And Safari. So you can download the browser, which is a more full experience, or you keep your browser and put Ghostery on top, or do both, because I think it's actually not a bad idea to have multiple browsers, because that also sort of segments your life a bit more, right? So you can use one for a specific type of, like, it's not uncommon for users to use Chrome for Google Apps with Ghostery installed, and then they use Ghostery for all the stuff that is more private and has more data, because there's an advantage of using Google Apps on Google Chrome. I mean, they make it a bit more difficult on other browsers.
Yeah, it's a definitely integrated platform experience.
You're saying that you can then give me information about my data?
So you can click on different patterns, and if you're a premium user, then you really get the whole, the real details, which is usually people from the advertising industry. Side notes: we have an awful lot of people in the advertising industry use Ghostery, and they know why. It helps them because they can see stuff, so they can see how competitors are doing, and it also helps them block it because they know they don't want to be part of that data.
Interesting.
Basically, when you click on the little ghost on your where on different platform it will appear in different places, it will basically list all of the trackers that we have identified and blocked. And so you can see, I don't know, if LinkedIn is spying on you in this thing. We cannot give you the data that they are collecting, because really what they are collecting, and that's the way you should probably see it the most, is there's only two types of data that they can collect. One is where you are, so that page, and maybe what's on the page. But that typically you don't see it because they encrypt it. And so the data, the profile that you have, is really a collection of places you have visited and maybe things you have seen on the web. And because they can cross-correlate that with where you are sometimes, because you will use an app on the phone that shares your location, they can sort of work backwards, right? Yeah. And what John Oliver did was basically that, right? You just collect a bunch of points until it becomes one person.
I think these things are working on me because I have multiple times bought stuff. Like I would have never thought of buying anything on Facebook, but what was like 3 years ago, I actually bought something off of it. And now I'm like recalling it. I'm like, now I understand. It was seeing everything that I was interested in buying. And I'm hook, line, sinker on that,
And that's let's say the positive use case, right? Because you could have a positive opinion of that to say, well, the advertiser is more relevant. I mean, that's basically the pitch that they give, right? The problem, in order to do that use case, they need to collect, I estimate, at least 15 times more data than is being used for advertising purposes. Yeah. So your profile becomes like a nuclear waste of stuff, of which a very small part is used, right? But the rest could come back and haunt you in different ways, right? Even if you have nothing to hide, it's just become such a perfect profile.
Well, and that's how you end up with Cambridge Analytica, right? I mean, it's like now you have all this data, and it's ripe for people who are going to do nefarious things with it.
If it made you buy some widget that you never thought that you would be interested in, it can also make you vote for a party that you never thought that you would vote for. Because they can tell you whatever you want to hear, right? And politicians are naturally prone to do that anyway. But now they can do this really sort of super targeted.
Yeah.
And so the best way is to not give them the data in the worst place, and the best way is to cut it out right at the source, right at your browser.
Well, now that we're kind of talking about Ghostery and how it works, let me throw out some stats here. I mean, on the Chrome store, you guys are sitting at 4.6 stars with 13,325 reviews. So you've been around for a long time, and you're obviously well liked. You got over 100 million downloads, right? So tell me a little bit about how Ghostery works in the background. Like, what are you guys looking for? What are you doing? What's some of that secret sauce?
So essentially, a large part of what we do has to be about understanding how the web works, both in terms of how can we make our product available on iOS, right? Because it really wasn't easy to put it on top of Safari. Apple actually helped us a lot, which is interesting. And it's about figuring out what these trackers are doing. So we have a website that is actually quite interesting for people who want to go into the details of that, called Who Tracks Me, or whotracks.me. And there we see like who are these trackers, which one have we seen where, who do they belong to, what techniques do they use, etc. So we have to do a lot of research, and our users help us a lot, because they, we have maybe, I don't know, a few percent of our users are geeks like us, right? And they tell us, hey, I've noticed that you don't block this, or this is going on. And then we, with every update, we try to make sure that we update ourselves. And with every update, I mean, it's basically a daily process, right? Because the tracking industry is a kind of a cat and mouse game. And so that's what we do. And then sometimes we make features that we always do that, but we spend a bit more time than trying to make it visible to the user exactly what should they. Like, for example, if you notice that the site is not working because we're blocking something that shouldn't be blocked, maybe, should we automatically remove tracking by when you click the reload button, which is going to be your sort of instinct, right? To say like something's missing, I'm just going to reload. So how do we make that experience of not breaking the web better? But basically, it's about really knowing how tracking works. Who are the trackers? Are we blocking the right ones? Are we sometimes making mistakes and taking them off? And then what we have done since quite a few years, I would think 6 years, is we collect a lot of data about trackers, never about the user, and in this FUTRtech system, and we try to identify requests that are both tracking and providing functionality. So, for example, the original example of that was the like button of Facebook, which has a function because you could like a page, which is nice, right?
Right.
But it was also a big tracker, because you can imagine that request of showing the logo of the like button was first telling Facebook about two things. It was saying, I am on this page, and this is this user looking at it. And what we did is remove the user part. So the button would be there, and it would function as expected when you clicked it, but it didn't track you when you didn't like. Right? Because that's also a bit of a thing, that people believe that Facebook only knows when they click on the button.
Right.
But the truth is, no, they knew, and they were everywhere, or they probably still are. But you have a lot of these trackers that are both functional and tracking at the same time, and we try to remove the tracking part out of it.
Yeah. Well, I got to imagine that there's all sorts of tracking in there, like, how long did you hover over an image, or how long did you pause on an article? And, so there's all sorts of passive ways of sort of understanding what your behavior is, right?
Yeah. If you look at some of the visualization that we do, basically you see that the web page sometimes never stops loading.
Yeah.
Because you have trackers that are actually measuring your engagement with the page. So whether you scroll to the end, whether you hover, your mouse is moving, or you just basically, you moved on to another tab, and in this case you're not engaged. But it is critical for a lot of these companies to measure how attentive you are to the page, and that data gets sent out with your name on it. Yeah. And that's really not something that, I mean, it's difficult to imagine a positive. I mean, basically, it's going to give you more of the same, which you have to be really optimistic to really want, right?
It's tricky because a lot of people don't really understand sort of the potential harm that some of this can do to them, right?
Yeah, and I think, like, even if you have nothing to hide, I mean, it's such a difficult world that you just cannot you cannot really make that statement much, because maybe it cannot harm you now. Maybe you can be harmed later. I mean, there was I'm at TED at the moment in Vancouver, and there was someone talking yesterday, and this was a woman that had a restraining order, I think, against someone else trying to locate her, and she found out that the stalker was able to locate her by buying data. You have, and you never know, if your country is going to suddenly change, or what's going on in the Ukraine, or even in my personal example, I mean, in Belgium, it was where I was born. It was impossible. It was forbidden before the First World War to record your religion on public record, on anything that the government had, which made the Nazis' life much more difficult.
Right.
And so how do you know whether this data is not going to hurt you somehow in 20 years, right?
Yeah.
Or you get mixed up with someone else, because, I mean, these data brokers are far from perfect, right? So let's say your profile get mixed up with a criminal or something, and then the police comes to you, though. I mean, the best is if it would not exist, right? It just cannot go. There's really no positive side effect of this, except maybe more profit for some advertising companies. And even that, I'm not convinced, because I come from publishing, and I think publishers and advertisers have always had, an industry that worked. I don't think it really works better now than it did before. I mean, other companies get money, right?
Yeah.
So there's definitely been a shift. But I don't know, if you work at Coca-Cola, do you really say, hey, this world is so much better than it was 20 years ago because of tracking?
Yeah, I think so many people get lost in the data that they don't realize that there's not a lot of incremental value necessarily from what they're doing.
And there's one thing that is absolutely clear, is that this data industry costs a lot of money. So that means that the money that traditionally went from advertisers to, content creator of some sort, there's a lot of, usually 15% would get lost to agencies and stuff. And now you have, I think the Guardian made an experiment of buying its own ads and lost like 70% of it. There's a lot of money being lost in this tracking, anti-fraud, and all of the stuff that comes in between, which used to go to content at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
And content is good. And that's probably why you don't have the quality of journalism maybe that you had before, because, some of the money is lost to the data industry. So I don't see much positive effect on that. And whether you have something to, it's a little bit like, why do you put curtains on your windows, right? It's not because you have something to hide. You just don't like people looking in. Right?
Those are some great examples. And I think that it really gives people something to think about, because I don't think people, think deeply enough about this. And I appreciate what you guys are doing, because I think it really provides a valuable service, right?
Yeah, and plus it has an immense leverage, because the time we spend on trying to figure that out, we can distribute to tens of millions of users, and they don't have to do it, right?
Right.
I mean, if everyone had to do this for themselves, this is the key to. I mean, I guess this is what the big trackers are banking on, right? Is that it's too difficult.
Yeah. For
individuals to defend themselves. So that's why it's very important that there are companies that just take it as a goal to figure it out for you and give you the tools.
Where do you guys go next from here? I mean, you've got kind of a suite of privacy tools, as I mentioned before. You've got the browser, you've got the extension. Do you go vertically? Do you go horizontally? Like, where do you guys go from here?
I think the main challenge is to keep to make sure that this ability that we have to influence the way web pages work continues in the future, because we are definitely. like I said, it's cat and mouse game, right? I mean, the industry is inventing stuff. We have to find ways to fight against it. The platforms or browsers, etc., are evolving, and in a lot of ways, Chromium based Chrome basically is becoming the monopolist of browser, and if that happens, they can whack out the extensions, like they can forbid us, right, in some form. And so I think that our prime focus is to basically continue to be able to provide the service in a world that becomes, on the one hand, more complex because the ways of tracking are more complex, but also more simple because there are kind of really big platforms that don't necessarily like you. I think in terms of expansion is basically that, right? To be on the platforms where, like, for example, going on iOS has been a very surprising and very positive development that I would not have expected. Because browsers are trying to reduce the amount of what extensions can do, and Apple, for some reason, went the other way, which is great. We didn't expect that, and we really worked hard to make it actually. It's still a bit clunky because it's very new for Safari to have that.
Yeah,
but it does work. I mean, it absolutely works. It's just a bit clunky. You download this extension from the App Store, and you have to turn it on. Like, it doesn't turn itself on by immediately. So that's clunky, but otherwise it's really helped protect the users. And so I would say that 99% of what we do is to try to be able to do this rather than try to do more or something different. I think that, well, there's maybe one big topic is that, and this is why we have this, the search part of Ghostery, which, you can be tracked by your behavior, but when you are tracked by your queries, it becomes much more personal, much quicker, right? Because you have a machine where you put essentially everything you want, desire, or whatever, you basically write it down, right? And we believe that it's important that these queries are not tracked and assigned to your name.
Yeah.
Because again, there's very little personalization that can come out of it that is good. And Google does really little of that. But just having this track, I mean, and Google has it, right? I mean, they have it for all of us for the last 25 years, I guess, if we're old enough. And I don't know if that's a good data set. I don't, I mean, I think I've told Google to destroy it, because you can sort of set it up, but I don't think they did. So it's not. So I think using a different search engine is something that is critical as well, and that's something that we work hard on.
Yeah.
And Cliqz, the company that made that search engine, has sold the search engine to Brave, which is doing a really good work with Brave Search, and this will come back to Ghostery as well in some form. And we have our search engine, which we believe is very important for people who want to not have this data simply recorded forever and ever.
I appreciate all the hard work you're doing. I'm glad you were able to come on and sort of share the story of Ghostery and its trajectory with us. And I'm going to continue using the Chrome extension for now because I got the whole YouTube stuff that I got to keep with. But very excited to see where you guys go. And thank you so much for coming on and telling us about it.
I was glad to be here and be able to explain the story. Great.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And if you like what you saw, please click on that subscribe button. I can't tell you how much that subscribe helps the channel. And I will see you in the next video.